Vincent, about the hurdles that this draft agreement has to jump over just on the UK side. Once that happens, if it does happen, it's still got to pass 27 remaining member EU states, doesn't it?
It does in theory, but I think in reality we were pretty much there with this draft agreement. Clearly the 27 nations have been pretty united over the last, 18 months or so since the negotiations properly began. They have supported Michel Barnier. And we have to remember, Belle, the last few months, or even indeed the last year or so, have really been about very specific stumbling blocks in this agreement. We've all seen the images of Michel Barnier holding up the document with the highlighted parts saying that 90-odd% had been agreed some time ago. So I don't think there's in any doubt that, on the whole, the European Union countries are on side with this draft text. Now, there will be a meeting of EU ambassadors in Brussels later on this afternoon, pretty much at the same time as the UK cabinet meets. That meeting had originally been scheduled to talk about a no-deal Brexit. The subject has now been changed to talk about Brexit progress, but working on the assumption, and we are working in the assumption that it will get through the UK cabinet today. That is when the European aspect of this all kicks into play. After that ambassadors meeting, we would then expect to see a meeting of the General Affairs Council. That involves the foreign ministers of the other 27 nations, probably take place on Monday. And over the next week or so, EU leaders and countries will go through the draft document in a fine-tooth comb to make sure that everything is up to their end of the deal, to try and iron out any problems. And there are still negotiations ongoing. This is still just essentially a draft document. And then the expectation, if all is going to plan, that we would see this emergency EU Council summit that had been scheduled for this weekend, but potentially could happen as early as next weekend. November 25th is being talked about, Belle.
And Darren, whilst you're talking about this timeline, when do you think the rest of us, we might get to see what's in this draft agreement?
That's a good point. It's 500 pages long. I suspect we will get to see the document in full at some point over the next week. But as Vinny was pointed out, much of it has already been leaked, or we already know about. I think what is interesting is that there will only be one backstop in this agreement. The analogy that's been talked about over the last 12 hours or so in regards to the Irish border and the Ireland question, the Vex question, has been the swimming pool analogy, that essentially in this UK-wide customs arrangement that will now be in place if the deal goes through, that Britain will be very much in the shallow end, with Northern Ireland in the deep end. It's an attempt to try and win over the DUP, that there won't be this specific Northern Irish backstop. Will it be enough? Well, so far it doesn't seem to be. And on the second idea of the mechanism to get rid of the UK-wide customs deal, now the UK has won that in a diplomatic move to have it as a UK-wide deal, but they want to be able to leave it unilaterally, Belle. And at the moment it appears in the agreement that it will only be done consensually between Brussels and London, and that is something Brexiteers fear, because they think it may mean that Britain essentially gets trapped in this customs limbo. So when will we get to see the agreement in full? Potentially in the next week. As I say, though, with Belle, it's 500 pages long. I think many of us, even when we do get it, will struggle to understand what it means. Much of it will be legal text and jargon about customs arrangements, but ultimately it'll be what the British side think of it that will be most interesting in the next 24 hours or so.